The sun has left and forgotten me.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker at Elkins Consulting. I would love to remind our listeners that community matters, and this episode will be all about community. If you're a small business owner and you're looking for a community of other professionals, the No Longer Virtual Summit is coming up February 10th and 11th, 2025. And please visit elkinsconsulting.com/no-longer-virtual to learn more about how you can benefit from this amazing community. It's limited to 25 guests, so make sure you check it out now before we sell out. Today's episode, as I mentioned, is going to be focused on community, and I invited my friend Al Swanson to join me here because he has some really unique experiences in building community around building very special, very unique products made from wood. Al and I shared time together a few years ago on an episode of this podcast. It was prior to a pretty serious and frightening diagnosis that he continues to deal with. So what better conversation to share with this dear friend of mine than how we build community and how we choose to participate in it. So for our listeners, we are sitting in this beautiful little study room in our gorgeous library here in Helena, Montana. And I think it's kind of unusual to have a facility like this in a town as small as ours. So I'm eternally grateful to the folks at Lewis and Clark Public Library here in Helena for offering this space. So Al, I know you answered this question years ago, but I don't even remember what the answer was, and I forgot to go back and listen. I love to ask my guests to share something about themselves that most people might not know about them. So the reason I do that is that I like for our listeners to hear a different perspective of who you are from what could be considered a point in time kind of description of who you are based on what we're going to talk about in the episode. So being able to expand that helps people know that the complexity of who we are as human beings.
Well, I'd be grasping at straws to try to remember what that specific answer was then all those years ago. But I've been asked that before in other contexts. And typically the answer comes up is that I studied agronomy in college. Agronomy, which is turf and soil sciences. So, which has, I shouldn't say it has nothing to do with where my career has ended up. I think it had everything to do with it, because growing up on a farm in rural Maine, we were very self-sufficient. So you learn to run equipment and tractors and yada yada, because we were harvesting our own animals and food and firewood and the whole bit out of necessity. But there was an element of fun to that and work ethic. And so being outdoors, and I love to play golf. And anyway, that just led me into this direction of, that would be a cool profession to be a greenskeeper. And I did it. I went to Rutgers University and studied agronomy, and it was super cool. But all the while I had this itch, and ended up working in the industry for quite a while. But had this, as I became more and more familiar with the trees, because of course you learn the Latin names of all the trees and things like that. There was this itch of this artist that was hiding in there that couldn't be under the thumb of a board of directors or a greens committee or that kind of a structure. So I made that conscious decision in 1994 to no longer do that. And I've been building things out of wood ever since.
I do remember this, and that is something that we talked about, but I don't know if you actually said that you majored in agronomy and that was your bachelor's degree, but I do remember some stories about being a greenskeeper and going from golf course to golf course and learning the trade. I do remember some aspects of that. And something you said kind of caught me. This artist in you couldn't really be fully explored or exploited, however you want to put it, as long as you had a board of directors or other people managing what you were allowed to do.
Correct.
And I think a lot of our listeners, even if they've been in a job where that's the case, I think that message will resonate with a lot of people.
Well, and some people, maybe still have to do that. Like that is the path that they chose. And I could have very well and could still be happy doing it. I still loved golf. I still love to be out there. In fact, when I was just back east in Maine, home a few weeks ago, I went to the courses I used to work at and saw them, and all these memories come, But so again, people, regardless of the path that they end up taking, and where they have bosses and levels, that's okay.
Right.
As long as you can make the time to be yourself. Yes. And to explore any sort of artisan element that you may have, whether that is, if it's gardening, biking, singing, it's a whole gamut. But I just couldn't be under that at all. Like, not even a little.
Well, being self-employed, and my older brother is also self-employed. My dad should have been self-employed. All of this really resonates with me. And I think for listeners, the reason this caught my attention is exactly this, is that we all have some creative side to us that needs to be explored. Every one of us. And when we don't explore that, that's when we get stuck. That's when our problem-solving capacity actually drops. And there's a book called The Reluctant Creative that my friend Dr. Caroline Brookfield wrote that I highly recommend for any of our listeners that is struggling with that aspect of creativity. Maybe you think you're not creative, or maybe you think you just don't have time to be creative. But finding an outlet for that is critical for your brain to succeed, to be a problem solver.
I couldn't agree more, because being self-employed is not easy, correct? Because there's so many different facets that you have to learn on the street, or you did maybe learn something in school, or from a mentor.
Hire somebody.
Or whatever,
right.
Whatever that might be. And so, though the challenges are there, I think because I can only speak for me, but knowing a lot of others like yourself, because you were allowed to go down that path, you chose it. It's like, the more I'm interested in something, the more I want to talk about it.
Right.
Like I used to hate public speaking. I used to hate crowds and things like that. Right. Until I found that when I was asked to talk about what I was passionate about, it just flowed without a script. Mm-hmm. And so I think you're able to learn those economics and management, finance and marketing quicker and easier when your passion's driving your truck.
For sure.
And it happened to me, and I've seen it happen to others, where if you're just stifled that little bit, it keeps your possibilities from really being tapped.
Fully imagined. Absolutely. I love that. And what really strikes me about what you just said is that when you can give yourself that freedom, even if it's in a small area, cooking, gardening, writing. I mean, I know a lot of people who just casually journal or write poetry just for themselves, not for anybody else. And those are the people that I see managing their emotions better, managing their stress level better, managing relationships better.
Well, it is interesting that you said that, because even before I really decided that this would be my profession, I found myself with a sketchbook and a journal book. Not really necessarily everywhere I went, but I could have some downtime and would write a little bit, but would draw. Because I had these ideas of how I could bring a tree to a home, and I could see it. But I had to put it's like a singer has to put it on paper. I had to put it on paper. And I have dozens and dozens of those that I've kept to this day that I can refer back to and go, oh yeah. And then having a little bit of a photographic memory doesn't hurt because I can see it and then I don't really have to look at it again.
Right.
It's just etched.
Right.
But having that little journal, that book all the while, and I still do it to this day. It's critical.
So listeners, I hope you are hearing what Al just said. Long before he actually took that plunge to do this full time, he was already sketching out and following this love and passion for wood and bringing some legacy to the beauty of a tree, right? Long-term, the tree's going to die, but bringing it to this legacy point. But you started by sketching. So there's always a small start to the acorn. It has to start with the acorn.
And having now been doing this for a long time, I'm asked often I'm disappointed a little bit in the lack of like new people doing this per se. Right. But every once in a while I'll get, a phone call, somebody will stop by or whatever and just say, how do I so want to do this and where do I start? How do I plant that seed? And it's like, oh my gosh. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer. There is no handbook, but there's a couple of different things that you can really do. And one of it is mostly absolutely love what it is that you're trying to accomplish. It doesn't matter if it's wood, clay, paint, you pick your medium and then you have to love it and you have to want to give it. You have to want to give it back. And that's how I started, was making gifts for people. No one knew who I was to buy anything. I didn't have a name.
Right.
But it was gifts. And I loved the fact that people were receptive to the gifts. And that kind of brought the community element to fruition.
Full circle. I love how you just did that. There are so many elements of community in this story. And the first that pops into my head is this idea that when you choose to go solo, it's not actually solo. I mean, we have to have the support network to make it work. And in your case, it may be beginning with people who will receive with grace your gift.
Well, that's what it was.
Right.
When I landed here 25 years ago, I didn't know a soul and no souls knew me. And how do you make that mark? Well, often folks can say, market it and they will come. This stuff speaks for itself. Not so much. Because there's a lot of really good people.
It's a town of artists.
It's a town of artists. And even if there's competition or not, the work does not speak for itself. You are the work. You're the artist, and the artist has to sell him or herself, per se. And I found that Helena, in particularly from the get-go, had this innate sense of community that I had never seen before. Growing up in and around Portland, Maine was cool and old and historic and colonial and 1700s kind of thing.
Right.
But I never really, and I was professional when I did there, but I never really saw or was really exposed to all the different institutions and things that we have here in Helena, from the Holter Museum to the Artistry to the Grand Street Theater, you name it. And it was, I'm going to find out when their galas are and I'm going to gift them a piece.
For silent auctions.
For silent, live, whatever it might be. And I did that. And the motive was mostly because I learned this is giving gifts for Christmas. Mm-hmm. If they're well received and it's in somebody's home, they're still paying for it, but it's an arbitrary number per se. But we know that those funds are going to help the institution, A. And B, that person gets my work now in their home that they get to stare at. And I often would go up and talk about it. One of the caveats would be, I'll do this, but I want to be on stage and talk about it. They're like, okay.
To explain where this comes from, where the wood is from, why it matters.
Well, because people are going to fall in love with the maker more than they're going to fall in love with the product. And that's still my vision today. Because again, lots of folks can build really cool pieces or make really cool paintings. But when I hear an artist talk about why they painted that painting and where, the subject matter, that changes the dynamic. Because now I really want it in my home because I have a piece of them.
Or not.
Or not.
Which I think is a critical factor here with everything we talk about with personal brand, whatever language, your reputation, whatever you want to hear from it, you are going to attract your people. And I so love what you're saying here because I noticed that when I moved here from Washington, D.C. 25 years ago. What I noticed was that I could be selective about the art I collected because I knew the artists.
Yes.
And to me, this is long before I considered myself an artist. I mean, I started doing clay work a couple of years after I moved here. Mm-hmm. And it took me 5 years of having studio space before I could actually call myself an artist. But so all those years before I considered that, I started collecting pieces from the people that I knew. And of course, I loved the work. I wasn't collecting pieces that I didn't think were beautiful and functional. I'm a functional user of pottery and other things. But I remember that moment here's actually kind of a funny story. Went to a gallery opening when we were really house poor. And Jacob was just a toddler. I was pregnant. And I saw this piece that was iris. And the iris is my favorite flower. It was our wedding flower. And it was, I thought, pretty inexpensive at like $140 or something. It was still a lot of money for us because we were so house poor at that point. But I wrote this check. And I was so pleased with my new piece of art, the first art that I bought in Helena, Montana. And the woman took my check and she said, well, the artist is still here if you want to meet her. And I thought, whoa, you move from Washington, D.C., you don't expect to meet the artist. Certainly not the first time, especially for a $100 piece, right?
Exactly.
So I was like, yeah, I'd love to. Well, I met the artist. And just to paint a picture, she had long gray hair. She was very beautiful and stately looking. And my first thought was, oh, I imagine starving artists. I don't imagine wealth when I think of artists. And so immediately there was a disconnect there. And I took that step back and thought, well, that doesn't change the art. And it came from her heart. So, changing that dialogue. But then as she was getting pictures taken, she flipped her hair so many times that it became really distracting to me. And you know what I did with that art? For 10 years, it sat in a closet.
Interesting.
Because I was so distracted by the way she carried herself, that it wasn't approachable. There was no warmth to it. And I had already been spoiled by meeting artists like Sarah Yaeger, and we'll have some links in the show notes, and George McCauley, who were warm and humble. And I thought, oh, I can be more particular.
Yeah. Like we can be particular as to the types of music we want to go listen to. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to go out just because there is music. I'm more inclined to go when I know the genre and I know the people in the band.
Yes.
And Helena is such that way because I have met artists as well in other states and things that are a little more off-putting per se, that smidgen of arrogance. It's fine. And that's them. But it doesn't leave a good taste, if you will. And so I get it. And Helena, I found, which is why I got into I needed a place to show work.
Right.
And thought, well, I'm just going to open one up because people need to, photographs don't do it. They have to pet it. They have to caress it. They have to open a drawer. They have to smell it.
Especially functional work.
You just do.
Have in your home.
And then in 2004, I did just that and on a whim. But knew that I could surround myself with some of these names that you just mentioned because Helena was so continues to be so blessed with talent, but talent that's linked to great people.
Yes.
These are people that I would have in my backyard and have a beer with, or a coffee with, or a tea with, not just somebody I'm going to look up on Google. It's a big difference. And the community senses that and it knows that. And which is why then, again, over the years, going through these different galas and things like that, there's a serious overlap of people that go to the same ones and support very much the arts in that way. And like I said, I've never been in a community like that, like this, that is so giving. But as I mentioned earlier, a community doesn't find you and you don't find it. You find each other. And then you have to grow with it if you choose to. And there are other communities in this world, and I even work in some of them, that are very hoity-toity, and it's all about money and power. But the sense of community is lacking. It just is. And here it's so robust.
Even people who completely disagree on Facebook, they will show up for each other when something goes wrong. So I know that we can talk about your diagnosis and that, but for some reason, I'm more drawn to this community around art. And I'd love for you to share just kind of brief snippets of the two stories of the trees, the ancestral historic trees that you have been blessed to receive to make things, legacy furniture pieces out of. So starting with the first story of that property, it's near Wolf Creek, right?
Correct.
Okay, let's start there, because when we create community around legacy and history in the positive ways, I think in some ways it heals some of the trauma of the past.
Well, and this first snippet was about 11, 12 years ago. And through donating pieces quite often to events, you get to know a lot of people. And I met this couple that happened to own this ranch near Wolf Creek at the time. And I knew nothing about it other than I fished near it, right? But they came to me one day and said, hey, we've got some walnut trees that died in the spring, and we wonder if you want the lumber. And I thought to myself, well, that's interesting, because those really have no business growing in Montana. I mean, you see them in Missouri, you see them in Pennsylvania, more, this arid with harsh cold, you just don't see it. So I humored all of us and drove up there and brought my son. He was quite young at the time, and got to see the horses and it was just such a cool historic layout. And as they told me about the history of the ranch and the whole thing, that became far more important than just trees, right?
Right.
But it turns out they were absolutely right. And they had, the people that had moved there originally in the early 1900s had planted a plethora of hardwood trees that just really don't grow here. But they did. Like that, there's this microclimate down there that just allows for this to happen.
Was this the Ricci
Yes.
family? Okay, so listeners, just as a little background, Rex Ricci is a phenomenal piano player and singer, vocalist. He's in his 80s now, and his son, Renan, is a dear, dear friend of mine, also phenomenal musician, plays the stand-up bass, retired from music years back. It was just too much on top of all the other things he's doing. But the fact that connection is there is important to me.
It's and I had no idea until you learn the history, and it's like, oh, well, I do have a connect because they're friends of mine as well.
Right.
And so we gathered up all this wood and had it cut into boards, and they said, well, you can just have it. Well, as it took a year or two to dry, and then I thought, again, the sense of community, like I don't really deserve to just have it. And I reapproached them and I said, you're you have children that grew up around these trees and things. And they said, yeah, why don't we make stuff out of it for them? Because to me, it's all about the provenance. I can buy walnut anywhere, anytime, have no idea. I kind of know what state it came from, but I have no idea whose farm.
Right.
It has no provenance.
Who might have planted it?
No clue.
100 years ago or more.
But this had a story. And that, to me, means way more than just the product. Because me as the maker can then carry that story on. That's the legacy that I love to leave, is that I got to play a very small role in material that was planted way before my parents were born. And we did just that, and we used up every stitch of it for their families. And it went all over multiple states, and I'm sure they're still using these pieces today, which meant quite a lot to me. And then kind of the add-on to that story, you fast forward a decade or more, and that ranch had changed hands. But the current owner, based in Florida, had been buying some of the smaller, we make wooden fly fishing equipment and things like that we've developed over the years. So he had been buying this stuff from us, but I never connected the dots. Why would I?
Right.
And one conversation though last fall, he actually called me and about this order. We wanted to change some things, and he had this, I have to use the word, wicked New England accent, which I can pick up on a dime.
Of course.
And we got to talking, and he said, yeah, I love to go to Montana and fly fish at my little place in Wolf Creek. And then I'm like, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I currently, that's my ranch now. And I went, oh gosh, you're kidding. I told him the story about the walnut, and he just kind of was speechless. And he said, do you remember the huge American elm tree that was planted out front? I said, oh, absolutely. We sat in a big swing in it, and there's a pond. And he said, well, we had to take it down because it was starting to rot, and it was huge, and we were afraid it was going to fall the house. And it's in this huge pile on the ranch. It's been down a year or two. And I said, what are you going to do with it? He said, well, now that I've heard that story, we have to do something with it, because we were going to let it just absorb into the earth.
Right.
Because we thought,
what are we going to do with it, right?
So I drove up, didn't meet him, but met the ranch managers and things like that. And they cut a piece off for me, and because I didn't know, I'd never worked at it. American elm has been all but defunct for a long time, especially on the East Coast, because Dutch elm disease took them out.
Right.
And I do know that they grow out here in different little pockets, but often like as a sole tree. So the disease just didn't get to it.
Right.
Apparently. So anyway, I had no experience with this stuff. Didn't know what it looked like as a lumber, and cut into it. It was perfectly fine. And I said, let's go. Let's turn this. Let's do it again. And then literally had to stitch all that together because it needed big, heavy equipment. His stuff was big. Mm-hmm. And we made it happen. And I spent about a month this summer just going up there, driving these logs back, setting it up on a mill, and I cut every ounce of it by myself with a sawmill. And now we have enough to where I'll be making furniture for them till I'm 80 for their family and their homes. Because, and again, if it was just about a product, the wood wouldn't really matter that much, because it's pretty, but it's not amazing. It's not tiger maple. It's not walnut. It's not cherry. But no other material has a pedigree like that does. That means so much now to this family.
And to other families. I mean, can you imagine if they say, we should make something small for Rinnan's family?
Well, we probably will, because even last fall, I had a small piece and I dried it. I actually made a whole bunch of cool pieces that became Christmas gifts that he was so excited to give to all the kids and family and yada. And we included a little engraved placard with every piece that gave the story in a nutshell. So every piece that...
in an acorn shell.
In an elm shell. So everybody, they'll get a piece of this in the future. There will be a little tag, provenance tag that goes with it. And so that's that. And then it's even updated more in the last week.
Oh,
I haven't.
news.
Yeah. So as I'm working with these, and it's a beautiful drive. I mean, what a job. Like I get to drive to it's beautiful setting, wonderful people.
You're driving from Helena to Wolf Creek, Montana, which basically takes you through the gates of the mountains, wilderness area, past Sebin Ranch land, which is spectacular, and into the canyon that goes all along one of the creeks. It comes along the Missouri, and then it goes all along the Missouri River. Blue ribbon trout fishing, unbelievably beautiful part of our world. As a matter of fact, when I think about the drives that I can take from Helena, Montana, going north along Highway 15 along the Missouri River up through that canyon is one of my all-time favorite beautiful drives. Okay, so.
Well, I mean, so what a treat for a job is to be able to drive up there and go on this massive ranch and there's elk. Then the Holter Dam, and then, the whole 9 yards. And then just wonderful people that are now actually keep adding on to the home. And there's some old ponds that are there that they're actually expanding significantly. So I was up there 2 days ago and met with a company that's going to do this restoration work, which is massive. They're going to take out a pile of more trees. They have to expand. There's maples don't really grow here. There's ashes that don't really grow here. Lots and lots of cool, large Russian olive trees that they are literally, as we speak, cutting them all down now. And we will salvage and I'll cut those. So it's just created this cool set of projects that I didn't see coming. And then to see the owner of the ranch, who was a very well-known executive in the business world, like a kid in a candy store, so excited that we can use this stuff to make stuff for his family, which again, Russian olive, I wouldn't really, you don't go buy it.
You wouldn't normally use that for this purpose.
You don't, but we will. And I'll segue real quick that I had a piece of Russian olive actually given to me, again, our community. A friend of mine gave me this pretty good sized slab of this about 6 months ago, and it's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. And I looked at it and I looked at it and I looked at it, and I'm like, this is going to make the most perfect hall table, and I'm going to cut it on a miter and fold one end down so the grain flows over the top. And I'm building it right now, donating it to the Helena Symphony for their auction this coming Saturday.
Wow.
So again, that element of giving that we all do to a degree. Some people write checks, some people sing, some people, whatever it might be. As the artisan, I give of my word, and it's still the motive is to see people happy to have what I did in their home. And the win-win, the organization makes money because we all need to have it going.
Right.
And even though I have friends that are like, stop giving.
Why would you do that?
You don't.
That would be out of alignment with who you are.
It is. Once you become out of alignment with who you are who you are. And so you find the time. And it makes me like, it's evenings, it's mornings, but I love to do it so much that it doesn't really matter. And especially this piece of wood that came from South Central, my neighborhood.
Right.
Like it came from Helena. So it's going to stay, hopefully, in Helena. And to me, again, that's that sense of community and keeping our little place ticking. And, as much as I've been there for it, it's been there for me. Because again, you have to find each other.
Right. So coming back full circle again to this whole idea of community, one of the things that my friend Paul Howry talks about, he's all about belonging at work and how critical that is for your success as a business and for satisfaction in the employees. One of the things we talk about together is self-belonging. And I think it's really important to remember that we can't belong if we don't choose to belong. And there are certainly places where we are not welcome, or we don't belong, and we definitely feel it viscerally. And yet, my belief is that we can only feel like we belong in community when we contribute to that community. It can't just be living.
And so, yes, it's not a place from which you can just take.
Right. And even more, if you want to belong, find a way to contribute. If that's what matters to you, is to create and nurture and sustain community, find a way to contribute.
And there's lots and lots and lots
so many opportunities
of ways, from volunteering to, look at our trail systems here in Helena. And our
extraordinary.
Prickly Pear Land Trust is such a quintessential driver of that. And I've been a supporter, as are tons of people in this community, of that organization.
Me too.
For decades.
Financially and through coaching. They're one of my StrengthsFinder clients, that organization. So I love to contribute by improving communication on that team, because what they do is so important.
Because you can actually go use it.
Yes.
It's there. It is not just willy-nilly. It is there.
Right.
And so important. And however you can help them. Right. Any of us.
And wherever you are, there are land trusts. So whether you're in Denver, Washington, D.C., New York City, Dallas, Texas, wherever you are, there are land trusts that do what our local Prickly Pear Land Trust does, which means it's all about working with landowners and conservationists to create easements and public lands for perpetuity. And right now, more than ever, we need to make sure we are keeping those green spaces, those natural, unimproved land and wilderness areas. Absolutely. So if you, regardless of your position politically, land trusts are a great place to contribute in whatever way you can. Well, on that note, Al, this has been such a treat. I loved this conversation. I know our listeners will find something to take away from it.
I hope so.
Hopefully it's something that changes something in some small way for them, a ripple effect of that seed planting, the acorn opening in a nutshell.
Exactly. Regardless of your position in the community, it just doesn't, or your age, or it doesn't matter. Get out and help, do something, volunteer, but mostly explore yourself, your inner artist that is there, that, again, we all have a little bit, and it will make you feel so much better when you can find that little bit and do something with it. And especially if that little bit is to help someone else or an organization, trust me, it makes you feel really, really good.
That's perfect. Listeners, it's your turn. What are you going to explore today, tomorrow, the next day in your creative outlet? What small thing can you take on? It might be picking up a coloring book and just starting to color, just to start to explore that. It might be picking out a recipe you've never tried. Or maybe it's finding your community at a library, a hiking group. Maybe it's the land trust near you to help with trail maintenance. Maybe it's something as simple as volunteering to read to children or reading to seniors at a facility. What will you do to find your community, to contribute to it, and to use that to better yourself and find alignment in who you are? I'll be curious to hear from you. Please send a note at elkinsconsulting.com.
Time you must just keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that